Some cops say they've seen it all. Shootouts. Overdoses. Bodies so mangled you stop wondering what human flesh is supposed to look like. But nothing, not war, not death, not darkness, prepared officers Daniels and Ruiz for what they found at 47 Maplewood Lane. It was supposed to be routine. A welfare check. Just a barefoot boy mumbling about his sleeping mom and a baby who wouldn't stop crying. No big deal, until the door opened. Until the stench of death slapped them in the face. Have you ever walked into a place so wrong, so heavy, it felt like the air itself was screaming? Have you ever smelled rot that seemed to whisper? Because what they saw inside that house still haunts them. Children lying in filth. A mattress soaked in decay. Crib blanket stiff with time. And in the back closet. Let's just say what they pulled from the shadows didn't belong in any mother's home. So now I ask you, how does a woman go from teenage mother to the architect of a house full of corpses? Was it madness? Evil? Or something even worse, indifference from a world that watched her unravel and did nothing? Stay with me. This is the story of Loretta Chambers. A woman who said angels whispered to her, while her children starved in silence. Like, share, and comment below, because what you're about to hear deserves to be heard. Before she became the woman who fed her children moldy crackers and told them the angels were coming, Loretta Chambers was just a girl with too much hope and not enough love. Born in 1988 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Loretta didn't get lullabies or bedtime kisses. She got silence. Her mother, Marlene, was a chronic depressive who rarely left her bedroom. Her father? A shadow in the form of a man named Darrell who came home only long enough to drink, rage, and leave bruises in his wake. Loretta learned early that crying didn't bring comfort, it brought fists, or worse, cold neglect. She was a quiet child. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she learned early that words could betray you. Her teachers called her dreamy, spacey, emotionally flat. One counselor once wrote, Loretta exhibits signs of dissociation. Possibly trauma-related. Home visits recommended. But no one followed up. No one ever came. At 14, she was pregnant. No one knew who the father was. She never said. One day she showed up to school with a puffy belly and dead eyes. The principal called it a tragedy, but no one stepped in. She gave birth to a baby boy in a charity ward of a local hospital, alone, while nurses whispered about another teen with no future. That baby was named Jacob. And Jacob would be the first in a line of children born not out of love, but out of Loretta's desperate, fractured need to feel needed. Over the next 12 years, she had 5 more. No father stuck around for more than a few months. The children came like clockwork, and with each one, Loretta retreated deeper into her private universe. A universe where angels spoke to her, shadows listened, and reality bent like smoke. She never held a steady job. She survived on government assistance, food stamps, and the occasional kindness of strangers who never stayed long enough to see the truth. Her neighbors would sometimes hear her yelling at the walls, chanting prayers at 3 a.m. Or walking barefoot in the snow, whispering to someone who wasn't there. But she wasn't always unstable. Some days, she was gentle, tender even. She'd braid her daughter's hair, kiss their foreheads, hum broken lullabies. And that's what made it harder to see. The switch. The spiral. The sickness. Reports came in. CPS received 3 calls over a 6-year span. Anonymous tips. The kids are always dirty. They look hungry. The baby cries all night. Each time, a caseworker would show up. Loretta would clean just enough to pass. Smile just long enough to seem stable. Say all the right things. And then close the door again. The children weren't allowed to leave the house. They were told the outside world was evil. That demons hid in sunlight. That God had a special plan for them, and it involved silence, sacrifice, and obedience. Jacob, now 14, had become more of a parent than Loretta ever was. He cooked what little food they had. Changed diapers. Read bedtime stories to his siblings when Loretta locked herself in the closet for spiritual fasting. Then came the dreams. Loretta claimed God was speaking to her in visions. That the end times were near. That she had to prepare the children for heaven. She stopped feeding them regularly. Food became a reward for silence. Baths were replaced with ritual cleansings using bleach and cold water. She made the kids memorize verses that didn't exist, repeating things like, "Suffering brings light. Obedience opens the gates." One of the younger girls, Lacey, once told a school counselor, before Loretta pulled her out permanently, that "Mommy prays over us at night with her eyes rolled back." The counselor logged the concern. Marked it for follow-up. Nothing happened. Over time, Loretta's delusions intensified. She began talking about the door. The children were told that one day soon, God would open a portal and take them to the golden room, but only if they were pure, quiet, and didn't resist. Then the locks went on the doors, from the outside. No more school. No more neighbors. No more sunlight. Loretta taped blankets over the windows. She unplugged the TV. She removed the clocks. Time itself faded. And no one checked. No one knocked. Until one cold March morning, Jacob, now 17 and skeletal from months of starvation, pried open a rusted window while his mother slept, bundled his youngest sister in a coat 3 sizes too big, and ran barefoot to the nearest gas station. He wasn't looking for help. He was looking for bread. But the clerk saw the sores. Heard the way the toddler coughed. Called 911. And the chain reaction began. Within an hour, 2 officers would step into a house that smelled like a tomb, and discover that the angels Loretta spoke of weren't coming. They never were. It began with a child. Barefoot, trembling, and covered in dirt, wandering into a gas station at the edge of Shreveport, Louisiana. He clutched a younger girl in his arms, no older than 3. Her tiny body was bruised, her eyes dull, and her breaths shallow and broken. They had escaped from somewhere nearby, but it wasn't yet clear from where. The boy's lips were cracked, and his wrist bore the unmistakable imprint of duct tape. He stood still, swaying slightly, as though unsure if he was truly free. Within minutes, the police were on scene. Officers quickly realized this was no ordinary neglect case. The boy's eyes told a story far more disturbing than his words ever could. He didn't speak much. He just kept repeating that there were more kids still inside. The address he gave led police to a 2-story Victorian house tucked behind an overgrown hedge of kudzu and thorns. The front yard was choked with rusted toys and the wreckage of long-forgotten furniture. Every window was darkened. No sound came from inside. Neighbors hadn't seen the family in months. Some thought the house had been abandoned. But what officers found inside was worse than any of them could have imagined. The door had to be forced open. Inside, the air was thick, nearly suffocating, with the stench of decay, mold, and something else, something heavier. Something rotten. The living room bore no signs of comfort. There was no furniture, no television, no light. Just piles of blankets on the floor, buckets used as toilets, and scraps of dried food scattered like remnants of some primal survival ritual. The wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. An improvised crucifix made of broken hangers leaned against the wall. Beneath it lay a tattered Bible, its pages torn out, as if devoured. Upstairs, the horror multiplied. 3 more children were found huddled in what used to be a bedroom. Their limbs were thin, almost skeletal. Their eyes, hollow. One of the boys had a chain fastened loosely around his ankle, connected to a rusted bed frame. He didn't try to run. None of them did. They just stared. A cassette player played on loop from the hallway, an eerie recording of a woman's voice reciting scripture in a voice so ragged it sounded like a whisper from a grave. The walls of the hallway were covered in drawings, doors, eyes, flames. All in red crayon. All frantic. All desperate. In the master bedroom, they found Loretta Chambers. She sat perfectly still in an old wooden chair, her back to the doorway, facing a blank wall. Her nightgown was stained and threadbare. Her hair was matted, falling in tangled ropes across her shoulders. She held her arms out slightly from her sides, as if mimicking the shape of a cross. She did not react to the officers at first. When she did, her movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent. She seemed detached from the moment, from reality itself. As if she existed in some private spiritual realm beyond comprehension. But it was the basement that brought the silence, the kind of silence that only comes when horror reveals itself completely. Down a narrow staircase, in near total darkness, officers discovered a pit in the concrete floor. A makeshift altar had been built from 3 stones stacked in a triangle, and atop it sat a mold-covered loaf of bread and a plastic cup filled with curdled milk. Behind the altar, they found the remains of a small child, wrapped in a trash bag and partially buried. She was later identified as Naomi Chambers, Loretta's youngest daughter. There were no obvious signs of violence. No blood. No trauma. The coroner would later determine her death was the result of prolonged starvation, untreated pneumonia, and severe neglect. She had simply faded. Quietly. Alone. Forensic teams descended on the house. Every inch was photographed, documented, scraped for DNA. What they uncovered was a descent into madness written in mold, filth, and scripture. Journals filled with spiraling handwriting lined the drawers and closets. The entries ranged from incoherent ramblings to terrifying revelations. Loretta had written about purification, about tests of faith, about a coming event she called the door. Some pages were smeared with food, others with blood. The oldest child, Jacob, became the key to understanding what had unfolded behind those blacked-out windows. He spoke calmly, recounting months of escalating rituals, fasting, isolation, silence. He and his siblings were forbidden from leaving. They were punished for crying. Fed only on holy days. And when Naomi grew sick, Loretta refused to call for help. Instead, she claimed her daughter's illness was divine. A test of faith. Prayer, not medicine, would save her. But prayer didn't. After Naomi's death, the house grew even quieter. Loretta told the children she wasn't really gone. She had simply entered the spiritual realm, waiting behind the door. They were not to mourn. They were to prepare. The media erupted. News vans flooded the block. National outlets picked up the story by evening. Photos of Loretta from years past, smiling, clean, surrounded by her kids, flashed across television screens beside headlines that read like something from a horror novel. Mother of 5 accused in child death cult, house of prayer or house of horror. Religious delusion or cold-blooded neglect. The community was stunned. Neighbors wept. Others grew defensive. Some claimed they had reported odd behavior. Strange sounds. Even pleas for help. But no one had pushed hard enough. No one had broken through Loretta's carefully constructed wall of spiritual isolation. Police dug deeper. Loretta had a documented history of mental illness. Hospitalized twice. Diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. Medications prescribed, never taken. Over time, her religious beliefs had grown increasingly erratic. Once a soft-spoken Pentecostal, she had turned toward apocalyptic doctrines, convinced she had been chosen for something higher, something terrifying. She had removed her children from school. Cut off contact with extended family. Withdrew from church. When Child Services last visited, Loretta managed to present herself as eccentric but functional. The children had been hidden during the visit. It was enough to satisfy the system. The case was closed. And so the suffering continued, behind that rotting door, inside those darkened rooms, until Jacob broke free. Loretta was arrested without resistance. She said nothing as they read her rights. At her arraignment, she refused legal counsel. She did not acknowledge the charges. She would later plead not guilty by reason of insanity. The community mourned. Vigils were held. Flowers were left outside the home, taped to the porch railing. A small white cross was hammered into the lawn. Meanwhile, investigators worked through the evidence. Witness statements. Medical reports. Loretta's journals. Every word, every drawing, every minute of recorded audio painted the same picture, of a woman descending into a pit of delusion so deep, she took her children with her. Loretta was charged with second-degree murder for the death of Naomi. 4 counts of felony child abuse. False imprisonment. Neglect. Prosecutors were preparing to seek the maximum penalty. But the public wanted something more. They wanted accountability. Answers. Someone to blame beyond just the mother. Because the question that lingered louder than any headline, louder than any courtroom gavel, was this: how many chances did we have to stop it, and didn't? The sun hadn't yet risen when deputies led Loretta Chambers out of her home in handcuffs. She wore the same faded nightgown she'd been found in, no shoes, no expression. The street was already lined with neighbors and reporters, their flashbulbs painting her pale face with a ghostly strobe of light. She did not flinch. She did not cry. She looked straight ahead, as if following a vision no one else could see. At the station, she spoke only once, to request a Bible. Her mugshot would become the face of a nightmare. Hollow cheeks, eyes sunken with something deeper than fatigue, lips parted slightly in what could have been a whisper or a prayer. The photo was plastered across every news outlet in America. Overnight, Loretta Chambers went from a forgotten mother in rural Louisiana to a national obsession. The charges came swiftly and brutally. First, second-degree murder for the death of her youngest child, Naomi. Then came 4 counts of felony child endangerment, false imprisonment, and criminal neglect. Prosecutors hinted that more charges could follow as investigators sorted through what they described as a catastrophic breakdown of maternal duty and basic humanity. The arraignment was held in a packed courtroom. The judge presiding had seen his share of horror, but something about Loretta's case brought a heavy silence to the proceedings. Cameras were banned inside, but audio recordings leaked within hours. In them, Loretta's voice was barely audible, monotone, but deliberate. She refused a public defender. When asked if she understood the charges, she paused for a full 5 seconds, then answered simply, "This world is passing away." The judge entered a not guilty plea on her behalf and ordered a psychiatric evaluation. The defense strategy emerged slowly, almost reluctantly. Loretta's court-appointed attorney, after her initial refusal to accept help, was a seasoned public defender named Helen Reese, known for her work in mental health advocacy. She was cautious but determined. Her initial statements to the press were brief, focused, and clear. This was not a case of malice. It was madness. Helen argued that Loretta had suffered from untreated schizoaffective disorder for years. Medical records backed it up. 2 involuntary hospitalizations. Repeated prescriptions. An extensive but patchy history with mental health services. But at some point, Loretta slipped through the cracks, again and again. She became her own prophet, her own judge, and eventually, her children's executioner, not with a weapon, but with silence and delusion. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Marcus St. James, took a different approach. He didn't deny the existence of mental illness. But he claimed it wasn't the whole story. This was calculated, he said. Controlled. There were journals, calendars, timed fasts, and a theology of death that Loretta had developed and enforced. She wasn't out of control. She was the only one in control. St. James painted a picture of Loretta as a dangerous zealot. Someone who had weaponized faith to justify the slow starvation of her children. He called it ritualized homicide. He warned jurors that accepting insanity as a defense would open the door for others like her. She wasn't trying to escape her mind, he told the court. She was trying to fulfill its prophecy. The courtroom became a war zone of ideologies. Mental health versus moral responsibility. Faith versus fanaticism. Motherhood versus monstrosity. And outside, the world watched with growing fury. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended daily, hashtag justice for Naomi, hashtag stop the door, hashtag the house of prayers. Talk shows debated the role of religion in mental illness. Parenting forums dissected every known moment of Loretta's life. Former neighbors gave interviews. Church members spoke out. Some wept with guilt. Others claimed they had always known something was wrong. One woman, a former friend, said Loretta once told her that Naomi had the spirit of an old soul and might not need to live long to fulfill her purpose. The public demanded answers, but no answer ever satisfied. Because the real question, the one that lingered like a sickness, was not how Loretta lost her mind. It was how so many others failed to see it in time. Then came a twist. 2 months before the trial was set to begin, prosecutors announced that a second adult suspect had been identified. Reverend Paul Dean, a former street preacher turned fringe prophet who once ran a private ministry just outside Baton Rouge. Journals found in Loretta's home referenced him multiple times. The messenger, she had called him. He opens the gate. Investigators uncovered transcripts of sermons he had delivered to small, off-the-grid congregations, sermons filled with apocalyptic imagery and Old Testament-style punishment. He had vanished 3 years earlier, just as Loretta began her descent into isolation. A manhunt began. Photos were circulated. Tips came in from Florida, then Texas. Finally, he was found in a remote cabin near the Arkansas border, alone, off the grid, and in possession of several letters from Loretta, written in her spiraling, manic script. He was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit child abuse, but his connection to Naomi's death remained tenuous. Prosecutors admitted there was no physical evidence he had ever visited the house. Still, his presence added fuel to the fire. Was Loretta acting alone? Or had she been guided, manipulated, even radicalized? Was she a monster? Or someone who had become the perfect vessel for another's twisted gospel? Reverend Dean refused to speak in court. His attorneys argued that he was delusional, too, but no one bought it. The public had already made up its mind. They wanted both names etched into infamy. Back in court, the battle raged on. Expert witnesses were brought in, psychiatrists, theologians, child development specialists. The defense presented Loretta's delusions as intricate but internally consistent. She believed what she did was right. Her journals revealed a mother terrified of a demonic world she believed was closing in. In one passage, she wrote, "If I let them go outside, they'll be consumed. Better to keep them close. Better to keep them clean." The prosecution called it willful ignorance. They argued that Loretta knew her children were suffering and chose ideology over instinct. That no mental illness could justify watching a child die slowly over weeks and doing nothing. And then, the children testified. One by one, they took the stand, carefully, cautiously, under protection. Jacob, now 13, spoke in a voice that sounded older than it should have. He described the rules, the punishments, the quiet death of his sister. He didn't cry. He just stared forward and told the truth, as he remembered it. The courtroom wept. In that moment, the story shifted. No longer just about Loretta. It became about the children. Their survival. Their resilience. Their innocence stolen. The jury deliberated for days. When the verdict was read, the room was still. Guilty, on all counts. But the judge, recognizing the complexities of Loretta's mental state, ordered a separate hearing to determine sentencing. There would be no death penalty. Instead, Loretta Chambers was sentenced to life imprisonment in a state psychiatric facility, with annual reviews to assess her competency. The public reaction was divided. Some saw justice served. Others saw a system that had failed twice, first by letting Loretta descend without help, and then by locking her away as if she had simply chosen evil. And Loretta? She never reacted. Not during the verdict. Not during sentencing. Not when her surviving children walked past her without a glance. She remained seated, hands folded, whispering something to herself over and over. Later, a courtroom guard would reveal what she had been saying: "The door is still waiting." The courtroom was charged with an electric tension the moment the trial began. Months of preparation, speculation, and simmering public outrage now crystallized into a relentless pursuit of truth, or at least the closest thing to it anyone could hope to grasp. Cameras filled every corner, reporters jostled for position, and jurors were sworn in, their faces a mixture of resolve and quiet apprehension. From the outset, the defense and prosecution clashed like titans. The prosecution opened with a visceral recounting of Naomi's final days, a meticulously reconstructed timeline supported by grisly forensic evidence. Photographs, medical reports, and chilling testimony from first responders painted a picture of slow starvation, neglect, and cold detachment. The autopsy revealed an emaciated body, organs failing, and a child whose final moments were marked by desperate hunger and silent suffering. Assistant District Attorney Marcus St. James leaned into this narrative with cold precision. He argued that Loretta Chambers' faith was a dangerous weapon, a veil she used to hide her cruelty. He called witnesses who spoke of Loretta's increasingly erratic behavior, neighbors who heard chanting late at night, former friends who described her as obsessed with apocalyptic prophecies, and social workers who had tried, and failed, to intervene. Then came the defense. Helen Reese rose with a calm authority, her voice steady but filled with urgency. She introduced expert psychiatrists who testified that Loretta suffered from severe schizoaffective disorder, a condition marked by delusions and hallucinations that distorted her reality. They described how her mind had constructed an alternate universe, a world where starvation was salvation and death was deliverance. One expert said, Loretta was not a mother who chose harm. She was a woman trapped in a mental prison, unable to see beyond her delusions. Another psychiatrist presented neurological scans showing abnormalities in Loretta's brain, evidence of a profound chemical imbalance. Helen also called social workers to the stand who admitted they had never fully grasped the depth of Loretta's illness, acknowledging the systemic failures that left the children vulnerable. But it was the testimony of Loretta's surviving children that turned the trial into an emotional battleground. Jacob, the eldest, spoke with a mixture of sorrow and strength. His words were measured, his voice quiet but clear. He described his mother's strict rules: no food after sunset, no leaving the house, no speaking unless spoken to. He recounted how Naomi had grown weaker day by day, how the family prayed for deliverance while the room grew colder with despair. On cross-examination, the prosecution sought to paint Jacob as a victim of manipulation, suggesting his memories might be confused or influenced by others. But the jury saw the boy's resolve, his pain laid bare, and it was impossible to doubt his courage. The courtroom was silent when the youngest child, Emily, took the stand. Barely 10 years old, her small frame trembled as she answered questions about the house, the isolation, and the final moments with Naomi. Her voice cracked when she said, "I just wanted her to eat. I wanted her to stay." Shocking evidence emerged too. A series of letters discovered in Loretta's bedroom revealed disturbing prayers and instructions written in a frantic script, dire warnings about the end times, demands for purity, and references to an ominous gate that her children must be prepared to enter. The prosecution seized on these letters, calling them proof of premeditation. They argued that Loretta was not simply ill. She was a zealot who consciously chose death over life for her children. The defense countered that these writings were symptomatic of her illness, desperate attempts to make sense of her fractured mind. As days stretched into weeks, the trial became a theater of human frailty. Family members were divided, some condemning Loretta's actions, others pleading for understanding. The media sensationalized every development, some outlets demonizing her, others portraying her as a tragic figure crushed by mental illness and isolation. A dramatic moment arrived when Reverend Paul Dean's connection to the case was revisited. Though not present in court, his alleged influence lingered like a shadow. His attorneys argued his absence was proof of innocence, but prosecutors insisted he was the hidden architect of Loretta's downfall. Witnesses who once attended his sermons testified about his apocalyptic teachings, describing a cult-like atmosphere that preyed on vulnerable minds. The jury was left to decide just how much power Dean had over Loretta, and whether that power made her less culpable or more so. Finally, after nearly 2 months of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom emptied, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The wait was excruciating. Then came the moment everyone feared and awaited. The foreperson stood and announced the verdict, guilty on all counts. The room gasped. Some cried. Some sat motionless, stunned. Loretta's face remained unreadable, but a single tear slipped down her cheek. The judge immediately called for a sentencing hearing, recognizing the complex interplay of mental illness and criminal responsibility. The sentencing was a somber affair. The judge acknowledged the tragedy. The loss of Naomi, the trauma inflicted on the surviving children, and the failure of the community and system to intervene. He sentenced Loretta Chambers to life in a state psychiatric facility, with periodic reviews to assess her mental state. Her children were placed into foster care, each grappling with the scars left behind. Outside the courthouse, the public reaction was a mix of relief and reflection. Protesters gathered, some demanding harsher punishment, others calling for improved mental health resources to prevent future tragedies. Religious leaders spoke about the dangers of fanaticism and the need for compassion. Mental health advocates urged systemic reform. The story of Loretta Chambers became a somber chapter in the national conversation about faith, mental illness, and parental responsibility. And as the courtroom emptied, a heavy silence fell. One filled with questions that had no easy answers, and a community forever changed by the harrowing ordeal of a mother, her children, and the darkness that consumed them all. Thank you so much for watching and joining me through this intense and emotional journey. If this story moved you or made you think, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep, gripping true crime narratives. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to bringing you more stories soon. Stay safe and take care.